Welcome to the Kindness Is Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the true meaning of kindness. I'm your host, Kaitlin Johnstone, the co-founder of Kind Cotton. Let's dive in.
Wake up.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kindness Is Podcast. I am so excited because today I have a very special guest who we have collaborated with in the past. Shelby Kretz is the creator of Little Justice Leaders, an organization that provides social justice education resources for educators and families. Educators and caregivers receive monthly kits that provide all the resources needed to engage kids about different topics of social justice in an age-appropriate way. Shelby, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Kaitlin. I am so excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, me too. I know I read a very brief description about what you do, but can you tell everyone maybe the inspiration behind Little Justice Leaders, a little bit more about what it entails, all of the things regarding what you do?
Absolutely. So at Little Justice Leaders, we provide resources for parents and teachers who want to talk to elementary school kids about topics of social justice. And we provide everything that you need to get those conversations started and feel confident having them. The inspiration from this work came in the years following the 2016 election. I work in education and I was working on my PhD in education at UCLA at the time. And I was just constantly hearing from teachers and from parents that they had no idea how to talk with their kids about the things that their kids were hearing in the news and the media. And many of them were just not talking about it at all because they didn't know how to start those conversations. And as an educator, that worried me because if the trusted adults in a kid's life aren't talking to them about the news and media that they're taking in, then it's just very likely that we're going to spread fear, misinformation, and seeds of bias and discrimination and ultimately hatred. So I kind of thought of my role as an educator and decided, maybe I could start to put together some resources to help parents and teachers. And I started to put them out, and then it kind of snowballed from there.
That's amazing. And I mean, going back to 2016, that was around the time that we started too, for like very similar reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And now, could you ever have imagined that we would be in the place that we are now? And I'm assuming that what you were doing is even more needed.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know, who saw this coming. I don't want to say we never saw this coming, but the absolute onslaught of attack on education with the misinformation about critical race theory and what that is, and that being weaponized against teaching real history, teaching about race and racism, and now teaching about gender identity, and LGBTQ plus identities. I mean, we have seen a serious backslide in not just what's actually happening in schools, but what's allowed to be happening in schools now. And so, yeah, I would say more than ever, these resources are important. And at the same time, more than ever, teachers have very real fear about actually bringing this to their students, because in many cases, it could cost them their job or worse.
Yeah. Have you talked to any educators about that? Educators who want to be utilizing this, but legally can't?
Some. I have had a chance to talk to a few, and a lot of times what they're doing is, working around the bans the best they can. So maybe they're covering a bunch of different justice topics, but not LGBTQ plus identities because that's the ban in their state. Or finding other ways to integrate these topics without direct instruction, finding ways to have representation without direct instruction. But even that, a lot of these laws are so unclear. Yeah. So I'm actually proposing some research studies for next year to look more deeply into this topic, specifically on book bans, content bans that are sweeping across classrooms, and to understand how those are impacting teachers who want to be engaging in culturally relevant pedagogy, want to be engaging in social justice education, but are navigating how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you and I know what the harms of this are. However, can you tell all of us what you believe the harms to be for the people listening? Because I mean, this is a really dangerous situation. When you look at states such as Florida. And I always talk about Florida because that's what I know. That's where I taught. That's where I still have very close connections. That's where I have friends who are still teaching. I know that the information that is given to me is real information. It's not some misinformation that you're receiving from a news source. And I know for a fact that they pretty much can't approach anything accurate history, anything LGBTQ centered, particularly LGBTQ centered and Black history. In the district that I was in, an MLK passage was taken out of curriculum. So, I mean, even discussions surrounding Martin Luther King Jr. are not being allowed in Sarasota County schools. So what are the harms of this? Because I can look at it from my perspective of we're creating a generation who is being actually completely indoctrinated into hatred and these biases. And when they go out into the real world, what is going to come of our future? But I'm curious as to what you believe from your standpoint and your research.
Absolutely. So there's kind of three big ones that I think are really, really important to be talking about. And I think there's also a lot more than that. But the three big ones I would name, first is, from teachers that I've talked to, for example, in Florida, a lot of cases in the public schools, they're getting rid of all of their books, not just the ones that are banned. And so this is a huge literacy issue, right? We know we have a literacy problem in this country. We need kids to have more access to books as we see school libraries completely shutting down because they do not have the resources to review every single book. And of course, the schools, the individual librarians and teachers don't want to put themselves on the hook for maybe accidentally having a book that they don't even realize goes against the bans that exist in their state. So rather than going through hundreds and thousands of books one by one, or maybe they're working on doing that, but it's not done yet, they're completely closing the libraries. So that, I think, is a massive issue that so many people don't realize is a side effect of these kind of sweeping bans, where they're not just banning, for example, like they used to, a single book title, or, even 10 specific books. They're banning these content areas of racism and of LGBTQ plus identities, where we're ending up with actual nonfiction books being taken off the shelves. And, again, just like all of the books being taken off the shelves when the schools don't have the resources to comb through every single title. So I think that's a huge issue. But I think just looking specifically at the taking away of diverse titles, this is a massive issue for representation, right? We've been fighting for representation in media and literature for so long, and now it's just being erased with kind of like one sweeping ban across the state. So, for example, LGBTQ plus students are not going to see themselves represented at all in their classrooms in Florida from K through 12. So the original, what's called the Don't Say Gay bill, was for K through third grade classrooms, and then that was expanded all the way through 12th grade. So that's over 100,000 estimated LGBTQ plus students in the state of Florida alone, and who are not going to see themselves represented in their curriculum. And that's not even including the students who have LGBTQ plus parents, family members, siblings who aren't going to see their families represented. And again, that's in the state of Florida alone. So when we look at all of the states who have implemented these kind of bans, and Florida kind of was an example for a lot of states who have followed, we can see how hundreds and thousands and millions of students will not be seeing themselves represented, whether that's racially or with gender identity, or sexual orientation. And then I would say kind of the third problem, and one of the ones that we focus on a lot at Little Justice Leaders, is seeing diversity in terms of what's different from you, right? So for those students who aren't part of the LGBTQ plus community, or don't know anyone who is and don't have family who is, or for the white students, they deserve to see difference and diversity. They deserve to have an education that expands their mind beyond their small slice of the world and their own experiences. And that goes for everybody, right? That goes for students who don't have disabilities learning about students with disabilities. It goes for US born students learning about immigration and refugee experiences. It goes for those who speak English as a first language learning about multilingualism. So kind of every justice issue we can think of, students who are in the dominant culture group or the group who holds privilege, need to be seeing stories, need to be understanding experiences of people who are different from them. It makes us more well-rounded humans. It makes us better global citizens, and it makes us stronger critical thinkers and problem solvers. So I think that's a huge issue too, is that we're just completely taking away that rich, diverse experience of literature for young people, even who are fully represented in their classroom, but now are not having the chance to explore and experience other identities.
I could not agree with you more. And it's so interesting. People who have listened to me for quite some time are going to know this story, but it just resonates so deeply right now. So when I was an educator for my last 3 years in the state of Florida, I taught in a predominantly white school. And I had a parent who followed me on social media, obviously saw everything that we always talked about, why representation was so important. And I happened to post something about Black Lives Matter, and she commented and said basically that I was a fraud, and it made no sense that I was teaching white students if I believed so passionately about Black lives. And I was like, this is the exact reason why. Like, you are proving my point. It is important for these white children, these white families, to see other histories, to see other families, to see other cultural dynamics, to understand the beauty in other people as opposed to continually othering other people. And I think that's often a lot of people's understanding though, right? Like, why aren't you going and doing XYZ? First of all, there's like massive white saviorism that comes into play when you're talking about what she was talking about. But there's also this lacking of an experience that is so important for white, straight, cis children and families to be a part of. So I'm happy that you brought up that piece of it as well.
Absolutely. I feel like that's so important, and it is kind of erased when we talk about it, because of course, centering diverse students, seeing themselves represented in literature, whether that's LGBTQ plus students, students of color, immigrant and refugee students, whatever that may be, is so important. So we want to like keep that front and center, but at the same time, it's also very, very important to expand the scope of this to say, this isn't just for, the students who need to see themselves represented in books. This is also for the students who always have been represented, because this is going to expand their global understanding, their awareness, and their educational experience, and enrich that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So what exactly would you say to a parent or an educator who kind of wants to start on this journey of incorporating more DEI in their at-home practice, in their classroom practice? What would you say is step one?
Absolutely. So I would say step one is just start having these conversations. I know it can be very scary. I know it can feel very overwhelming. None of us are experts on every single topic of social justice. I think we need to let ourselves off the hook for that. There is this idea of like, if you say the wrong thing, then that means something's wrong with you, or, whatever that may be. And the truth is, none of us can fully understand everybody else's experience when we're talking about such a wide range of issues of justice. And so start having these conversations. Admit when you don't know. If your kid asks a question or says something kind of unexpected, as they do in these conversations, tell them you don't know, gently correct them as needed. Try to start learning more, start looking into resources for yourself to make these conversations easier. Diversify their bookshelves. That's the easiest thing you can do, and probably one of the most important. But just jump into these conversations, and you will learn as you go, and make sure you're open and honest with your kiddos so that you're not, perpetuating any harm, bias that you might have. Digging into your own bias is really important as well. So it's kind of a multi-step process, but I would say step one, just start having the conversation. If you genuinely come in with a willingness to learn, a willingness to do better, and admit when you're wrong, then you can kind of fumble through these conversations together with your little ones. And it truly is easier than you might think.
And kids know. right? Like at an early age, there's tons and tons and tons of research out there, particularly when we're discussing race. I mean, children as early as 3 have racial identities, and they're also choosing playmates based upon race and similarities and looking like the other child who they may be choosing to play with. So it is so important to have these conversations. Also, children are really going to just say what they observe and what they see, and that is okay. Like it is, I can remember, oh my goodness, at one point, one of the other teachers who I was working with mentioned a time in which they had a reader come in and the reader was a Black man. And one of her students stood up and was like, "He's Black." And she was just like, "Shh," instead of being like, "Yes, this is a Black man. Like, do you have any questions? You know, he's going to be our reader today. Let's welcome him with open arms." Um, because kids are going to say very blunt things, as you mentioned, and it's important to not them from these conversations. It's important to welcome them into these conversations. And, everyone always says children children are not born racist. They learn that. However, if you are not actively teaching them to be anti-racist due to the nature of all the media and all of the biases and all of the systems of oppression that we have that are put in place very much, what is the word I'm looking for here? Strategically, then they're not going to be anti-racist.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'll hear from parents all the time who are just absolutely shocked that their 7 or 8-year-old makes a really racist comment or a homophobic comment. And they're just appalled. They're like, "Where did you learn this? We don't practice this in our family. Like, you didn't hear this from us." And the reality is, everything they hear is not going to come from you. So even if you do create a very loving household, they have outside media. They have, even if they're not using social media, which most kids are, but even if they're not, they have kids at school that they're hearing from. They have their older cousins, neighborhood kids. So they have a lot of sources of information and misinformation. And so, like you said, you have to be directly counteracting that. You have to be coming head on to have these conversations, because even if you think they're way too young for it, like you said, by 3-4 years old, they have racial and gendered identities, and they already are starting to develop biases. So it's not too early to incorporate representation ever. And then at 3, 4, 5 years old, it's definitely time to start integrating those conversations more directly.
Do your boxes go as young as pre-K, or are they specific to elementary?
Right now they're specific to elementary, so we focus on K through 6th grade. However, there are a lot of preschool families and educators who get the kits, and they will adapt them for younger ages, kind of take the content and make it more appropriate for 3 and 4-year-olds. And on the flip side, I also have middle and high school teachers and parents who do the same. They'll get the kits and kind of adapt them for the older grades. I mean, truly, so many of us are beginners when it comes to these topics of justice. So a lot of times, like, the boxes really can kind of be for all ages, but they are designed to be specifically developmentally appropriate for K through 6 and standards aligned for K through 6.
Can you go through what a typical box may include?
Absolutely.
And who you work with? Because I feel like it's very important for people to hear, when you pick a theme, you really go all in on including people who are representative of that community to be a part of that box.
Absolutely. So when we select a theme, the first thing that we do is start check through, like start asking around in our network, through our communities, who are really like leading the conversation on this topic, particularly in the world of education with lived experience. So for example, that means if we're doing a box on immigration, we're looking for people who are immigrants and usually are speaking out, whether they are content creators, educators, activists in the world of immigration. So we'll try to find 3 to 5 of these folks, and we call them our kit leaders. And they kind of guide the creation of the entire kit, because we want to make sure that it's created by people with lived experience who have personally understand the issue on a personal level, who have some kind of professional or work experience, activism experience with that topic. And having at least 3 is really important to us, because even within any community, we're going to see tons of diversity. So our kit leaders aren't always going to agree on how a topic should be taught or what's most important to teach. And that's kind of the point, right? We don't want one perspective. So we tried to get, at least 3 to 5 perspectives in every kit, kind of overseeing and guiding that. Then inside the kit, parents and teachers are going to find, first, they're going to get a welcome card that introduces the topic, kind of tells you why we're talking about it and why it's important. And then a whole set of instructions with a bunch of different activities and guides to like how to go through this box. They're also going to get a kid's book, of course, with representation that's either directly about the issue or representative of the issue. They're going to get lesson plans that are standards aligned that go with that book, and then also additional lesson plans to go with other books they might have or they might want to look at, as well as just other kind of classroom activities that they can do. And they're going to get at least one piece of activist art. So that might be a sticker, a poster, a magnet, something cute that the kiddos can keep to remember, kind of put up in their classroom or at home to kind of remember what they've learned from the box. And then we do have 2 different styles. So we have our box, which is also going to have hands-on activities. So that might be the actual craft activities that they're going to do in the box for them. And then we have kits, which don't have those hands-on activities. That's because we got a lot of feedback from some folks that they just didn't really need the craft supplies, and they felt like it was a bit of a waste. And they'd rather have more curriculum, lesson plans, information. So instead, we've kind of packed those kits more with lesson plans, standards aligned curriculum for teachers, and more information. And then they still get the activity. They're still told kind of an activity that they can do. They just have to provide the resources, and those usually come with things that teachers and parents are likely to have at home anyway, craft supplies. And then they're also going to get a whole set of information cards. So these will be things like tips for the adults, conversation starters for kiddos, books to learn more with book recommendations for kids and adults, an organization spotlight where we spotlight an organization doing this work in the world who we're donating a portion of that box proceeds back to. So, and then other things might be history facts, kind of anything else that we think is important to cover on that particular topic, so that the parent or the teacher has kind of everything that they need to feel really confident going into those conversations.
That's amazing. And then, so say a parent wanted to sign up or an educator wanted to sign up and they started today, and I'm assuming they come monthly, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
And then what if they wanted to keep going? Have you had anyone who's done it for more than a year, and you change them each year? Or is it like this set of 12 boxes and you can only do the subscription for a year? Tell me about that.
Yeah, great question. So every single month's a new month from the very beginning. So you could go for years and you're never going to see the exact same theme repeated in the same way. So we have created now over 62 boxes on different themes over the past 5+ years. So yeah, you'll never see the same ones repeated. And then we also will have some leftover inventory, which we will sell as individual boxes. So if someone wants to try out a single kit or a box, they can do so that way as well.
That's amazing. And tying back in this idea of growing misinformation, I want to know 2 things. I want to know why something such as your box is so important. And 2, where do you see this going years from now? Like, I mean, I know this is just your educated guess, but what do you see the dangers of misinformation doing to our society?
Absolutely. So, yeah, it's really important. So the way I see our boxes tying in, and we actually are just now launching a K-6 curriculum for schools. So hopefully our future is going school and district wide as well with curriculum. But the way I see this countering misinformation, one of the biggest things we focus on in these boxes is not telling kids what they should think about these issues, but giving them the resources to learn, to research, to make decisions based on critical thought and understanding an issue in its complexities in a way that's rooted in kindness and empathy and justice, right? So I think the more and more boxes that kids go through, or, even if you don't have these boxes, I always like to say, you do not need to buy anything to do this work. But these conversations, the more and more conversations like these that we have with kids, where we're encouraging them to think complexly about all of the different issues that exist in the world, how they exist, why they exist, what has led to that. It's going to help them develop critical thinking skills. And critical thinking is, in my opinion, the number one way we're going to counteract misinformation and bias. Misinformation and bias is harder to spot than it ever has been before. The media has gotten really good at it. And frankly, even folks who are trusted sources of information can easily be confused and misinformed because of the way that information spreads differently now. So we need critical thought more than ever. We need people asking questions. Where did this information come from? How do we know? Who's reporting on it? Who's saying something different? And what are they saying? And how do I make sense of this in terms of what makes sense? What do I already know about this topic? Who do I trust on this topic? So asking all these kinds of questions, and that's really what we encourage kids to do. We encourage them to read widely. We encourage them to explore, follow their interests, follow their curiosity. All of those things that bring joy to education are really the same things that facilitate critical thinking skills. And so I do think that is the antidote to misinformation, fake news, propaganda. And it's not going to work every time because, like I said, this misinformation machine is getting better and better. But when we have a fully educated generation of young people who can ask questions, think critically, and work together to do so, we're going to be much more prepared to say, hey, maybe that's not right. Maybe we stop, slow down, ask more questions to better understand. And then the future of misinformation, I think if we aren't actively counteracting it, it's definitely going to get worse. We've seen that happen just in the past few years, in the past few months and weeks. And it's so easy to be fooled because the easy ways of checking if something was legitimate just don't work anymore, right? Like, it used to be if 100,000 people shared something, that probably meant it was accurate. And now that's not true anymore.
No.
So or if a reputable news source reported on something, it probably meant that was accurate, but that's not true anymore. And so, yeah, making sense of that, it is going to get worse, which is why we need to get better at counteracting it.
Yeah. And I think that's the same when it comes to anything social justice related, right? We could go back to talking about book bans. It's going to get worse, right? Because these voices are loud and these voices are getting things done. And if we don't counteract that, it's just going to snowball.
Absolutely. And of course, with social media and with AI, anything can be made to look real. And kids especially just don't have the brain capacity to even make sense of things that might be obvious to adults. Now we have things coming out that aren't even obvious to adults that they're fake. And so it's like, we have to equip kids and ourselves, frankly, with better skills for understanding how to manage this, because with social media and AI, it's going to be harder and harder to understand what's real. I mean, you're going to see people you trust speaking physically, like you're going to see it with your eyes and hear it with your ears, and it's going to be fake. And so how do we make sense of that? And it has to be with education, and understanding how these tools work, how these tools will work, so that we can predict what avenues of false narratives are going to be, how they're going to be coming at us in the future in ways that couldn't exist 5 years ago or even now.
That's so scary.
I know.
Well, let's not leave on a terrible note.
Right.
I would love to know. I always ask what everyone's definition of kindness is, who comes on. However, I'd also like to know something that gives you hope. So if you want to say your definition of kindness and wrap that into something that gives you hope in the future, by all means. If you want to answer it as two separate things, let us know, because I do think that there is a lot of beauty in social media and a lot of beauty in education and connection, conversation. So I'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. So for us, I mean, I think of kindness as social justice, right? Kindness is justice. It's creating a world where everyone feels validated, seen, has their needs met, and, you know, where we can coexist and co-create and just have the opportunity to be our fullest and truest selves. So I think it really comes to justice. That's what kindness is, and to me. And in terms of hope, I have so much hope for the future, despite what we were just talking about. I think there are a lot of things to keep our eyes open about and be very mindful of. And at the same time, I am so hopeful by all the educators who are pushing back against this. I mean, the sweeping bans in some ways, obviously we talked about, are so concerning. And in other ways, they're bringing out the absolute best in so many folks. They're bringing out this whole group of educators, families, kids who are actively trying to make a difference. And in the end, I really do see that prevailing over any of the hate, any of the bias, any of these bans. I definitely, like we said, they might get worse before they get better, but they will get better. And that's because there are so many folks, activists, educators, who are actively working against this and actively finding ways to make sure that kids feel represented and kids get to explore all the beautiful diversity in schools and in literature. So that definitely gives me hope for the future. I think we are on the right track, but progress is bumpy, and it always is. And so just remembering that when we have those setbacks, this is part of the journey, and the world we're creating ultimately is going to be a lot better.
Thank you for that. I needed to hear that myself. And thank you so much, Shelby, for being here and for putting out into the world what you do. Everyone go and check out Little Justice Leaders. I know that our daughter is getting to the age where I need to be checking it out myself now and incorporating it. So go ahead and do that. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Kaitlin, for having me.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the Kindness Is podcast. If you love it and it's adding even a little bit of value to your life, we would love, love, love if you could subscribe, rate, and review so we can reach even more people and make this world a little bit more kind.